and learn more about how governments are leveraging innovative financing mechanisms to channel resources toward the learners who need them most. And we will also reflect together on the need to mobilize more robust data to make adequate decisions about financing levels and targets. In this context, I'm happy to present our lineup of speakers, starting by two of our UNESCO colleagues working for the Global Education Monitoring Report, as always collaborating with this initiative. So first we'll have Yuki Murakami, who joined the GEM report as a research and data analysis in 2026 to work on education finance issues. Previously, she was a health economist at the OECD and analyzing health using the system of health accounts. Also from the GEM report, we will have Ana Cristina Dadio, who is an economist and has worked as a senior policy analysis in the GEM report team since 2017. Prior to this, Anna worked at the OECD on issues including financial education and literacy, inequality, poverty, the intergenerational transmission of education, and social protection. From IIP, we will have Diane Curie, who is a senior program specialist. She supports UNESCO member states in education sector analysis and strategic education plan preparation, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation, including in crisis-affected countries. She has also engaged in various projects related to ECE, including studies on ECE financing, the effectiveness of models. Then I'm also delighted to introduce Albert Negdizuma, the Executive Secretary of the Association for the Development of Education in Africa, that many of you know. Before joining ADEA, Albert occupied various cabinet positions in Rwanda, including that of Ministers of Infrastructure and Ministers of State for Tibet in the Ministry of Education. He's also one of the IIP's governing board members. And finally, we will have Mariana Hupe Foller, who is an economist at the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, CEPAL in Spanish. Her main areas of research focus on education and labor inclusion for young people in Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, Muriel, the floor is yours for moderating the session. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Martin. So a few points regarding the organization of this session. So for our sessions today, we are going to give 7 minutes for our different speakers to talk and to share their presentation with us. And this would be followed by a short round table. And after this roundtable, we give you, online participants, the floor. So please do not hesitate, as Feng Shu, my colleagues, was telling you, to post your questions in the chat room during the presentations for our Q&A session. And we'll try to keep around 25 minutes at the end of the sessions to respond to your questions and queries. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our colleague from the GEM report that are going to set the scene for us on the topic of today. So over to you, colleagues.
Thank you, Muriel. Thank you, Martin. I'm going to share the screen. So let me know if you can see it, because we have some issues here. Let me check what's going on. Okay. Can you see it?
It
Yes.
works if you can put it
Okay.
full. Yeah, perfect.
It is? Okay,
It
good.
is, yeah.
So thanks a lot, everyone, and I'm really delighted to be here with you and to share this presentation with Yuki, my colleague. So we will share it and we'll try to stay very short so that there is time for discussion. Quickly the agenda, and just to pinpoint some important definitions that we will use throughout not just our presentation, I imagine, but all the discussion that we are having here. Then we will turn to the work we are doing at the GEM report, the Global Education Monitoring Report on equitable finance. And we will discuss how we put these issues in a conceptual framework, looking at different dimensions of financing equity. And then we will discuss some issues related to combining equity with efficiency and some challenges and opportunity. And I will close the presentation. So first of all, we are here all. I see that there are a lot of audience, so very, very nice, and illustrating why this discussion and why this is a strategic debate, especially currently in the landscape for education we are seeing. And so when we talk about education equity, it's very important to not confuse equity with equality, because the idea of equity really is that ensuring that every learner has access to the resources, to the opportunities and support they need to succeed. And this regardless of their background, their identity, or any other circumstances. So this definition of education equity is really mirror the definition that UNESCO has also used for inclusion in all this work, and is very, very important. But when we talk about education equity, very often there are also discussion and debates about how education equity combines or does not combine with education efficiency. Because education efficiency is also very important. We can think about education efficiency from the internal point of view of education system, but also externally. And the idea of education efficiency is really why and how we can get the best possible education outcomes with the least waste of resources. And this is really very important to discuss together with education equity. And why financing for equity matters? Because discussing equity and discussing efficiency in education also speaks about these terms that maybe look like a little bit weird, but is really the reinforcement. Because when we talk about education equity, we realize that investing in disadvantaged learners can really yield higher returns. And the fact that countries have to or are increasingly concentrating on equity reforms is also to make spending smarter, spending more efficient by reducing dropout, by aligning funds where they are needed and improving transparency. These are also all things that are very important. So turning to the work on the on equitable finance that we are doing, we are using mainly two kinds of approaches, a qualitative approach and a quantitative approach. And we are doing this in these two ways, using two main sources. One is the peer country profiles. So the profile enhancing education reviews, and in particular, those that have been prepared in 2020 on financing for equity, but also those, and here stay tuned, that we will be launching together with our next Global Education Monitoring Report 2026 on access and equity that will cover all UNESCO member states. And the other important part in the framework, and that Yuki, my colleague, will talk about, is the equity financing framework for SDG 4.5.2. Just briefly on the peer profiles. The peer profiles are a tool that we have developed in the Global Education Monitoring Report to, as the name say, to foster peer learning and dialogue across countries on issues that are core to the SDG 4. And in particular, the next country profiles will focus on financing for equity. specifically looking at the mechanism that are behind the dimension of funding that focus on equity within a countries. This is a desk-based work that we are doing internally at the JAMA report, looking at policies, legislation, but also taking a deep investigation of what the countries are spending in these different mechanisms. With this, I pass the floor to Yuki. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm so sorry. I hope that you hear my voice correctly.
Yes.
Okay, good. I just had a last-minute technical problem. So thank you so much for inviting us to the debate series. And I'm very, very happy to be here. In 2021, the JAM report published a policy paper on financing for equity that addresses disadvantages linked to poverty, remoteness, gender, ethnicity, disability, and other disadvantage factors. And we combined, and actually just one slide before, please, sorry. Oh, that's fine, yeah. And we combined the policy information and the data on 4 categories of equity-related education policies from about 80 low and middle-income countries. The information shows the extent to which education and social policies are designed to address these disadvantages in education. But just before that, I just want to give you a very quick context of why this work it has been relevant and why it is. It's because, first of all, we have estimated that over 272 million children and youth are out of school. But at the same time, public spending is actually not keeping up with the needs. From the joint report with the World Bank, we call it the Education Finance Watch, that we have estimated that the government spending on education as a share of GDP fell by 0.3 percentage point since 2015. Especially this is more relevant, prevalent in lower middle income countries. Also, the education spending as a share of government spending fell about 2 percentage point in middle income countries at the same time. Now, next slide, please. So quickly, let me just show you the 5 ways that we collected the data and how countries actually use public funding to improve equity. So first, the central government to subnational governments. Support can flow from central government to those subnational governments through formulas or per student allocations. This often includes like teacher salaries, but also be part of the general education system and education that could actually, the education can be earmarked and non-earmarked. In more centralized countries, support goes directly to schools or to local offices of the Ministry of Education through grants and some other formats that include additional funds for disadvantaged areas. And another channel would actually support families and students through waivers, scholarships, and a stipend. Social protection, that is the 4th element, would actually go to help poor households that would influence school decisions. And lastly, we think that the school meal programs can also offer in-kind support that encourage participation among children in poor and food insecure areas. So we collected the analysis. The next slide, please. We collected the analysis and analyze the volume and the coverage of such policies. So basically, it started with the comprehensiveness, just to tell us whether the policy exists for each dimension or not. And the volume showed how much funding is actually being allocated and to what extent of the support that goes. And the coverage tells us how many schools or students or households actually receive it. Taking this together, we have analyzed the information both on the policy and then also the volume. Next slide, please. I think we're going to discuss later, but here we can actually say that the analysis brings together the idea that equity and efficiency actually reinforce each other. Better targeting allows countries to spend resources in a smarter way rather than simply spending more. And we see that in several areas, for example, formula-based funding, regardless of earmarked or not. These would help reducing regional inequalities and because it actually directs more money to where the needs are highest and limit discretionary decisions. And also essential is the consolidation of many small funds or grants that may act and which would actually reduce fragmentations and lowers the administrative cost. So more money reaches schools. And funds directly support students via students and cash conditional or cash transfer would also support disadvantaged students to stay in school, which cannot be addressed by the overall financing mechanism. And finally, school meal programs improve attendance and learnings and increase the value of every unit of spending. And on that, I'm going to give the floor back to Muriel. Oh, sorry, to the IIP.
You had a last slide, colleagues, on challenges and opportunities.
Oh,
No.
it's okay. I'm going to, because we are over 7 minutes, so I'm going to
if you just one word,
use
if you
that
want to,
as
just to say,
a debate session. Yes.
Okay, keep it for the debate. Okay, good colleagues. Well, thanks a lot. As you've seen, my colleagues have shared in the chat the policy brief that you have referred to. So don't hesitate to have a look at it with more details, and we will come back to some of the elements that were on the last slide during the discussion. And now we are going to move to early childhood, because when we are talking about investing in learning equity, sometimes early childhood is being forgotten. But our colleague Diane from IP is going to explain to us the importance of investing early by investing in early childhood. So over to you, Diane.
Thank you very much. I think, Camilla, could you share the slide for me? Thank you. So thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today. As Muriel said, my presentation will be on early childhood education and its financing. Early childhood is a critical period where inequalities often start, but it's also a period where we have the best chance to prevent them. So I will present some global evidence and practical ways to fund ECE and more equitably and more efficiently. Next, please. So the science is quite clear. The early years are when the child's brain is developing the fastest. That means where the language has been shaped, where sociability is being promoted, and where problem-solving and thinking skills are being developed. Any delays at this stage are really hard and more expensive to fix later. High-quality early childhood program, as shown by research, improves school readiness, reduce repetition, reduce early dropout, and increase completion of secondary and higher education. This is particularly true when targeting the most disadvantaged children. They also support parent employment, especially mothers, and lead to better health and productivity in adulthood. Because of all this, early childhood investments yields some of the highest return in the whole education system, particularly when they reach disadvantaged children. So the question here is not only why invest early, but in who. Next, please. Despite the strong case for ECE, what we are seeing is that access and financing are still deeply unequal. Today, around 3/4 of children do benefit from at least 1 year of organized learning before primary school, but it means that roughly 1/4 of them still miss out. The children left behind are disproportionately poor, rural, from minority language group with disabilities, or on the moves as migrants and displaced children. A major reason is money, with financing pattern mirroring and reinforcing these gaps. In many countries, pre-primary is underfunded. As UNESCO data show, the median government spending on pre-primary was only 0.4% of GDP, or about 8% of education budget, both well below international targets. In some countries, spending is even close to zero. Donor funding is also very tiny. So this pattern results in a situation where families must pay a large share of ECE cost out of pocket. This makes financing quite regressive, with the poorer household paying more relatively to their income at this level of education than at higher education level, following that higher education is often highly subsidized. This results in a situation where public spending often benefits better off children more than the poorest. So what is equitable financing means? It means that, next please, that every child, especially the poorest, can access at least 1 year of quality pre-primary without fees being a barrier. And there is a global consensus actually on this. The 2030 Education Agenda and the Tashkent Declaration call on countries to guarantee at least 1 year of free and, if possible, compulsory pre-primary, and to increase public spending with a focus on the most marginalized. Many countries have already done this, but still much more effort is needed. In 2021, out of 183 countries with data, 63 made EC free and 46 made it both free and compulsory. These legal frameworks do matter because they remove fees, they signal political commitments toward EC, and allow citizens to hold government accountable. To implement this, countries are proposed to follow what we call progressive universalism. You start by guaranteeing 1 year of free pre-primary with a focus on children who are the least likely to be enrolled, and then you gradually expand coverage and age group as capacity and resource grow. But free and compulsory EC must be backed by adequate budget. Otherwise, we see the risk of having overcrowded classroom, recruiting untrained teachers, which will ultimately lead to poor quality services. So countries need to earmark a clear share of the education budget for ECE and move over time gradually toward the benchmark, such as 1% of GDP or the 10% of education spending as defined by the Tashkent framework. And because also EC is often delivered, no, it was before, but it's okay, by non-state actors, government also can use smart public finances partnerships, subsidies, as well as result-based financing to crowd in additional resources and reduce costs for families, always with strong regulation, quality standards, and a focus on low-income students. Putting equity at the center also means targeting resources to children who need them most, those in rural areas, marginal communities, low-income households. Government can use tools like poverty maps, child development indicators, and enrollment data to identify priority groups and apply transparent, formula-based allocation so funds reach them. Clear needs-based criteria help prevent regressive spending and make education financing more equitable. Reducing or removing fees for these families, and when needed, subsidizing transport, meals, or providing cash transfer have proven effective in raising enrollment by reducing the cost borne by families, known to be the biggest barrier to access ECE. At the same time, we must invest in quality where gaps are widest, training educators, providing appropriate teaching and learning material, and ensuring safe, inclusive learning environments are needed to support quality service delivery. Robust data system also essential to track who is enrolling, who is learning, who is benefiting from spending, and to guide future resource allocation and monitor equity outcome. Finally, none of this will be sustainable if EC remains a small add-ons or a donor-driven project. Equity-focused ECE must be fully integrated into education sector plans. That means including pre-primary in the sector diagnosis, setting clear targets for access and quality, planning the needed workforce and infrastructure, costing intervention and targets, and assigning a defined share of the budget to ECE. When ECE is visible in the ESP, it is easier to mobilize domestic and external resources and to hold governments accountable for results. Let me conclude with few messages. First, equitable EC financing is both a rights obligation and a high return investment. Second, neutral funding that treats all children the same simply reproduces existing gaps. Indeed, as Anna mentioned, equity is not equality. Equity, so you need to target having targeted funding is smarter and more efficient. And equity is really giving more to those who need the most. Then countries can act now with concrete measure, fully embedded in ESPs, as I mentioned, guaranteeing at least 1 year of pre-primary, using proper funding formulas, waiving fees for low-income families, investing quality where it is weakest, and collect disaggregated data to track who benefit while building towards sustainable domestic financing. And just to finish with a note, putting equity at the center of EC financing is not a luxury. It is a condition for high-performing education system and more inclusive societies. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Diane. I think the two messages that we have on this last slide mentioning that equitable EC financing is the rights obligations with the high return investment, and that neutral funding reproduces a gap is going to make smooth transitions toward the presentation of Albert, who is going to help us understand maybe this concept of learning poverty and how to eliminate learning poverty by 2035, again building on the main outcome of the very recent triennial meeting. So over to you, Albert. We can see your slides. If you can put them, full screen.
Let me put my camera on. Thank you, Muriel, and thank you, Camila, for your support in the preparation of this webinar. And I've been following the previous presenter. Some of the key issues that came out of their presentation was really of a great value to my presentation. Can you see my presentation?
We can see it, but it's not full screen. If you can just click full screen.
Let me click, yes, it's me.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. So I was saying, I would like to thank you for organizing this webinar, especially around this time where international development aid is really declining. And this was one of the key topics for discussion during the last triennial 2 weeks ago. So in relation to learning poverty, we have seen a number of calls to end learning poverty in different platforms. And I've cited some of them here, including the African Union and End Learning Poverty for All campaign in Africa. Several countries have already subscribed to this, and we are really encouraging other countries to come on board. Again, I see this as part of our critical issue moving forward. How do we make sure education is seen as an investment, not a cost, which I think came out also out of the discussion. We also saw the declaration, ministerial declaration in Kigali in 2024, where ministers committed through this declaration to invest in ending learning poverty. The New York Short Declaration as well was December last year. And last but not least, during the last triennial, we are sending what we call the outcome document of the triennial will come out this week, where you could clearly see the importance that we attach on learning poverty in this perspective. So this is really commitment, and we know commitment at one side, but the most important thing is how do you translate commitment into concrete actions moving forward. So there are a couple of things that we consider as a data in this case. As already alluded to, increased investment in education and training, especially where it matters the most, starting with foundational learning. You will all agree that less investment in foundational learning will actually be too costly to countries when young children move to other level of education. We also need to scale evidence-based interventions that improve foundational learning outcomes. And we have seen over the last 10 years or so, there are a number of evidence that have come up with the support with all partners, and some of them are here. The question is, how do we make sure that policies are informed by those evidence? We see this as a big challenge. The translation of this evidence and support to policy and practices remain a critical issue that we need to push as much as possible. There is a need of a continued support to teachers through coaching and mentorship. When we see the need for teachers over the coming 10 years, millions. So how do we make sure these teachers are getting support, particularly in terms of coaching and mentorship is so important as well. The issue of adequate teaching and learning materials have also come up in different platforms. We really can not emphasize enough. Last but not least, we need to keep leveraging education technology to deepen reach and uptake. So both addressing the issue of access, especially to those remote areas, as we talk about equity, but more importantly, the uptake in terms of raising the quality appropriately. So what are those catalytic factors to consider in this perspective? Starting from, of course, policy, we definitely need to have policy that supports classroom instruction. Moving from the top to down, because in the end, the change will be seen in the classroom. So I think that connection remains so important. So, for example, the use of mother tongue as a language of instruction is something that we need to continue pushing consistently to many of the countries. I've seen some of the countries coming back again to the foreign languages, but this is another debate that we may need to have. We also need to strengthen assessment and data generation in foundational learning. There's a lot of effort going in this regard. As a day, we are promoting the harmonization of assessments, from assessment for learning, but also assessment of learning. And this starts from tracking progress, informed teaching, and data-driven decision-making. These are three important things we believe will definitely be needed as we look forward to end learning poverty. There is a need to increase accountability across the education system. Start from use of resources allocated. I think the issue of efficiency that came out of the previous presentation cannot really be emphasized enough. It's so important. As we look at the issue of financing for education, we're not just looking at it in terms of volume, we're also looking at how best we can use available resources in terms of raising efficiency and effectiveness. It's also equally important to assess learning outcome, because in the end, all these investments are meant to strengthen and improve learning outcome. As a day again, with partners, we will continue to advocate for importance of foundational learning at all levels of governments, education system, and communities. We believe education is a matter that could actually be qualified as a public good, going beyond the education system itself. It's very important to make sure that the society plays its part in improving learning outcome. The coordinated effort by implementing partners and funders supporting countries, we have picked an example here. This is a new initiative known as FLIGHTS, our foundational learning initiative for government-led transformation. This is a new initiative supported by different donors and philanthropies that will help government to strengthen their education systems. This is going to be launched sometimes next year, and we're definitely looking forward to engage with some of the partners and countries here present. So there's a call to action, obviously, starting by increased domestic investment in education, reduce dependence on donor aid. So basically the point is, how do we look inward as opposed to outward? There's so much that can actually be done at the country level. I have heard from partners here opportunities to look at alternative financing models, including innovative financing, develop an education financing framework that align with relevant continental frameworks to end learning poverty, strengthen and expand country-level technical capacity for foundational learning investment in areas such as data, pedagogy, and school readiness. We also need to focus on financing models. So this is actually examples that we have seen for producing really tangible results, including the public-private partnership. There are some good examples that we've seen in some of the countries, including Ivory Coast and Ghana, where around the cocoa production, so a number of companies, private companies are coming on board to support government, raise more resources for education and foundational learning in particular. The issue of accountability, governance, and transparency on the management and disbursement of education resources is incredibly important around this time, because any single dollar counts. So we definitely need to raise accountability in this perspective. So this is really a few slides that I wanted to share with you, and I'm open to any question in this regard. Thank you again.
Thanks a lot, Albert. I don't know if the details of the call is available maybe on their website, or if there is a link to get the details of it.
Yeah, definitely. We will share the link with colleagues because this is going to be part of the outcome document as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Albert, and for highlighting the importance of not only looking at volumes, but also of the good use of available resources, and including by paying attention to transparency and accountability issues. And I think this is also one of the topics that our colleague Mariana is going to talk about in her presentation, moving us from Africa to Latin America and the Caribbean. So over to you, Mariana.
Thank you, Muriel. Thank you very much. I'll share my presentation.
If you
Replace, yeah, I think I have to replace the current share.
maybe Albert, if you can close your presentation, and then Mariana
No,
will
but
be.
I think I can replace it.
Yeah.
I think it's sharing right now. Please let me know if you see it.
It's coming. Yeah. Yeah, it works. If you can put it full slide.
Yeah. Are you watching the entire screen right now, or my notes?
No, it's on the display mode. So you need to change the display mode.
Yeah, I'll touch the display setting right away. Perfect. Now it's okay?
Now it's okay. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, I'll switch to Spanish now, taking advantage of the translation. And I know there is a lot of people from Latin America here, so I'm taking advantage of that opportunity. Buenos días y buenas tardes a todas y todas. Muchas gracias por conectarse hoy y muchas gracias por invitar a la CEPAL a participar de esta
Thank you
importante
so much for having connected to this webinar, and thank you for this invitation, very kind invitation.
I think I'm listening to English now. I'll put in silence my computer because the English is interrupting my presentation. Okay. Es realmente un honor para mí participar de este debate. En esta breve exposición voy a centrar en presentar algunas de las recomendaciones que un grupo interinstitucional de 8 instituciones
An overview
en un
of
documento
the
acerca de cómo
interinstitutional
invertir de manera más
group
eficiente y más
recommendations,
equitativa y con
and this
sostenibilidad
is all
financiera
about
en América Latina y el Caribe en
investing
educación.
in an equitable and sustainable fashion in education so that it is also sustainable.
Desde la CEPAL
This
hemos
is
insistido en un
for
punto
Latin
clave.
America and the
Invertir con
Caribbean.
equidad no es un
So
costo, sino es
we
una estrategia de
actually
eficiencia.
have
Por
a
un
very
lado,
important
es
point.
eficiente desde la
This,
perspectiva de la
it's all about
inversión educativa,
efficiency,
reduce las tasas de repetición, de
efficiency in
abandono,
terms of
disminuye las brechas de aprendizaje,
investment. It actually
haciendo
reduces
mucho más
reputation and
eficiente los
dropout
recursos.
rates,
Al
and
dirigir la
also
inversión
the
hacia los territorios donde el retorno al
and
final
makes
es mayor.
resources
Y al
more
limitar además los altos
efficient
costos que implica
that
corregir
can
las
be
desigualdades que
targeted to
pueden generar posteriormente.
regions where
Pero por otra
the
parte,
yield is high. It also helps
equitativamente
us
en
solve
educación
inequality
también genera
problems
retornos
which
productivos
can
que van
arise
más allá de
if
las esferas
we're not
educativas.
careful.
Entonces, invertir con equidad en
Equitable
educación
investment is
tiene retornos
over and
eficientes
above
desde
education.
el punto de
This
vista del desarrollo. Tiene
investment
retornos
has
económicos al mejorar
high
la productividad, la
returns
empleabilidad y la
in
calidad del
terms of
empleo,
development,
retornos sociales, al reducir
employability,
la transmisión intergeneracional de
productivity,
la pobreza y fortalecer
and
la
there's
cohesión
also a
social,
social
retornos fiscales al ampliar
yield
la base
because
contributiva y
of
retornos
the social
institucionales al
returns.
fortalecer
We
la
also get
democracia. En
fiscal
definitiva, cuando se
returns
priorizan los estudiantes,
because you
escuelas y
get better
territorios
tax,
con
and
mayores
also
desventajas,
institutional
se
returns.
maximizan los retornos de la inversión,
So
tanto en la esfera
we
educativa y
actually
también en la
are
esfera del desarrollo en
optimizing
general. Por
investment,
eso,
whether
invertir con
it's
equidad
in the
no
field
es un
of
gasto, es una
education
estrategia
or
eficiente
development
de
in a more
inversión
general
que
way.
permite avanzar hacia un desarrollo
Equitable
social
investment
inclusivo.
is not an expenditure, it's a very
No obstante, a pesar
strategic
de la centralidad de la
way to
educación para
ensure
una estrategia de
sustainable
desarrollo social
development.
inclusivo, la
Having
inversión
said this,
educativa en
even
América Latina y
though
el Caribe
education is
sigue siendo insuficiente.
indispensable,
América Latina y el Caribe invierte casi
Latin
5 veces
America
menos por
and the
estudiante de lo
Caribbean
que
need to
invierten en
invest
promedio los
more
países de
and
la
better in
OCDE.
education.
Una brecha
You can see
considerable
that
cuando se toma en
the
cuenta los
region
grandes desafíos
investments
de los sistemas
5
educativos
times
de la
less per
región
student than
en
the
temas de
OECD
inclusión y
average.
calidad.
when you see the inequalities that exist. And there's also a problem of inclusion. The OECD countries are richer and they can actually invest more per student. But when you look at the per capita rate, in the OECD is investing 40% more per student compared to the average in Latin America. Of course, each there are inequalities in each country. Here you've got an average, but depending on the country, depending on the socio-economic category, the divide is higher, and investments must be much more equal. The interinstitutional document on this slide was recently published. You have the World Bank, the CIF, the Latin American Campaign for Education, civil society, UNESCO, UNICEF, and all this was actually coordinated by SIPA. And the objective is to have a consensual policy to guarantee uh, efficient education, and that ensures financial sustainability. And I'm going to concentrate on expanding the fiscal space for education, establish minimum sufficient investment standards per student, strengthen costing, monitoring, evaluation, and accountability systems, and mobilize resources across sectors. So this document is online. You've got the link to the Spanish and English version to your
Primero,
right.
expandir el espacio fiscal para la educación.
Now, first of all, with regards to expand fiscal
Aumentar los
space for
recursos
education,
disponibles para la
you
educación en
remember the
América Latina y el
previous
Caribe es
graph. You
una
need
condición
to
necesaria para cerrar la brecha de
increase
aprendizaje y
resources
garantizar una
for
igualdad de oportunidades
education
para
in
todas y
Latin
todos.
America. It's really important
Existen
to
diversas
actually bridge the
alternativas para
divide
expandir el espacio
and
fiscal destinado a
guarantee
la educación,
equality.
pero
There
entre
are
ellas la más
various
importante en términos de la
possibilities,
magnitud de los recursos que
especially in the
moviliza
most
es la
important one
movilización de
being
recursos domésticos. En
s-
promedio,
uh,
cuando se comparan los ingresos tributarios de los países de la OCDE con
mobilizing
los países de
national
América Latina,
resources.
se observa
When
que la OCDE
you
recauda
compare
1,5
the
veces
budgetary
lo que recauda
resources of the
América Latina
OECD
en relación
countries
con el
with
PIB.
Latin American countries,
El
you can
llamado
see
entonces
that
es a implementar
the
mecanismos tributarios más
OECD
progresivos y a
recovers
fortalecer el combate contra la evasión y la
1.6%
ilusión
more
fiscal
than the Latin
y al mismo
American
tiempo
countries.
proteger
So
y
you really
priorizar a
need
la
to
educación dentro del
strengthen
presupuesto público para
the fight
garantizar
against
equidad en las
tax
políticas educativas
evasion
entre los distintos
and,
años y los distintos ciclos
and
electorales.
avoidance, and
Estas dos
prioritize
cosas requieren el
education
liderazgo de los
in
ministerios de
the
educación
public
para formar
budget.
acuerdos nacionales amplios entre distintos
This
actores públicos,
requires
privados y la sociedad civil
leadership
que
from the
posicionen a la
Education
educación al
Ministry
centro de una
and
estrategia
various
nacional de
public and
desarrollo.
private actors and
La
social
segunda recomendación es establecer estándares mínimos de inversión
partners.
por estudiante que
Secondly,
sean
you
suficientes
really
para
need to
garantizar condiciones de
have
aprendizaje dignas para
minimum
todas y todos.
investment
Desde un
standards
enfoque de equidad,
per
este
student
estándar de
to
inversión mínima por
guarantee
estudiante no solo debe establecer un piso común,
standards.
sino que también garantizar
You
asignaciones
need to
diferenciadas
have
en función de las
a common
características y
base
necesidades de cada territorio o
and
grupo
have a
poblacional. Un
differentiated
ejemplo interesante a nivel regional es
allocations
Brasil, lo que ellos
according to
están
the
haciendo con
needs
el
and
costo alumno calidad,
characteristics.
el cual define
For
cuánto debe
instance,
invertirse por
you
estudiante
have the
para garantizar
CRQ in
condiciones dignas de
Brazil,
aprendizaje.
Custo
Este
Aluno
estándar considera
Qualidade. It
elementos como las horas de
defines how much
docencia, los
investment
salarios,
you
la
need per
infraestructura, los
student
materiales
to
educativos,
guarantee
y si
equal
bien fijar
learning
estándares mínimos
conditions that
comunes de
takes into
calidad,
account several
permite que la
things,
estimación de
several
costo varíe
factors,
según el nivel
and
educativo, el tipo
uh,
de escuela y las condiciones del
it
territorio,
also
incorporando así una dimensión de
helps
equidad
us
al establecimiento de este
assess,
estándar.
depending
La tercera
on the
recomendación es
target
fortalecer los
population.
sistemas
The third
de costeo,
recommendation,
monitoreo y
how
rendición de
to
cuentas. Desde
strengthen
una
costing,
perspectiva de equidad,
monitoring,
estos
and
sistemas deben basarse en
accountability
indicadores
systems.
sólidos y desagregados que
Now,
permitan
these
visibilizar las
systems
múltiples
should be
desigualdades que
based
persisten en
on
los sistemas
robust and
educativos.
disaggregated
Necesitamos contar
indicators to
con
take into
información que
account
refleje quiénes quedan
the
fuera de los sistemas
inequalities in the
educativos,
education
cómo avanzan
system.
los distintos
You
grupos
also
de estudiantes
need
y cuántos están invirtiendo en cada
reliable
uno de ellos para
data.
poder evaluar los
You'll
resultados
have
de
to
las inversiones
see
en educación
on
y ajustarlas
how
a
different
tiempo.
students are doing
Esta
and what
recomendación va de la
amount
mano con
should be
fortalecer los
invested
sistemas
in each
de información y
student.
gestión educativa,
You also
FIGER o
need to
EMIS
strengthen
en
and
inglés,
expand
y estos sistemas
EMIS.
tradicionalmente se han utilizado
Um,
principalmente para controlar variables como
and
la matrícula, la cantidad de docentes o los datos
generally,
demográficos, y nuestra propuesta es ampliar su
it helps us
conceptualización para
see the number of
incorporar
teachers
información
and
sobre
students,
financiamiento,
but
uso de
we have
recursos y los
to
resultados de estas
integrate
inversiones, de manera
data
que los países puedan contar con datos para
on
monitorear mejor la
financing
calidad
and
la equidad y
resources.
eficiencia en la inversión educativa.
Countries should have
Y
concrete
finalmente,
data
la
to
cuarta recomendación es
improve
movilizar recursos de
the
manera sectorial, como ya se
efficiency. The
había
fourth
mencionado anteriormente en
recommendation
la
is
presentación.
mobilizing resources
Como todos aquí
across
sabemos, la equidad
sectors.
educativa no depende solo
And
del
this was
sistema
actually said
escolar.
in the previous
Factores como los
presentation.
ingresos del hogar, la alimentación, el
Educational
transporte, la
equality
conectividad, el
does
cuidado,
not
la
depend only
salud,
on the educational
condicionan las
system,
trayectorias de
but there's
aprendizaje.
also
La mejor
collectivity,
articulación entre
transport,
la inversión
and all
educativa con
this
políticas de protección social y otras
determines
políticas
the
relevantes para el
learning
bienestar de los
pathway.
estudiantes, favorece las
There
trayectorias
should be
educativas
a
y
proper
les permite
fit
a las niñas,
amongst
niñas,
social
adolescentes y
policies.
jóvenes
And this is
contar con las
how we
condiciones
can
materiales necesarias para la
promote
escolarización
educational
y el
pathways
aprendizaje.
so that the youth have
Ya para
good
cerrar, voy
learning
a
conditions.
resumir
And
brevemente los
now
principales
to
mensajes
end,
de la
I just
presentación.
would like to sum up
Primero, invertir con
very
equidad es una
briefly
inversión
my
eficiente.
investment, my
Cada peso o dólar bien
expose.
asignado no solo reduce
We really need
desigualdades,
to
sino que
invest
también aumenta la productividad,
equitably
la
in an
cohesión social, el
efficient
crecimiento económico, la
investment.
sostenibilidad
Each dollar
fiscal, entre
properly
otros retornos colectivos que
invested
permiten avanzar hacia un
guarantees
desarrollo social
economic
inclusivo.
growth, equality,
Segundo,
and
América
this
Latina y el Caribe
again
necesitan
helps
invertir
us
más y mejor en
guarantee
educación.
inclusive
Es
social
importante
development.
aumentar los
Latin
recursos
America
y
and
el
the
destinamiento
Caribbean
donde
need
más
to
se
invest more
necesitan.
and better in education. You need to
Tercero, los compromisos
increase
en educación
resources.
son
And
permanentes,
thirdly,
entonces se
we need
requiere de
commitments to
sostenibilidad
education
financiera.
that
No
are
basta solo con
permanent,
aumentar
and
los recursos
therefore
y
we
distribuirlos mejor,
require
sino también
financial
asegurar su
sustainability.
estabilidad en el
It's not
tiempo.
just about
Cuarto, proponemos
redistributing,
estos
a
cuatro
better
ejes, expandir
redistribution
el
of
espacio
resources
fiscal para
in
la
long term.
educación, establecer una inversión mínima
Fourthly,
suficiente por
there are four
estudiante,
pillars
usar la
for
evidencia para
equitable and
asignar,
efficient
monitorear y rendir
financing:
cuentas,
expand
movilizar
fiscal space
recursos
for
de manera
education, establish a
intersectorial
sufficient minimum
y finalmente,
investment per
para todo
student,
esto,
use evidence
necesitamos
to
el liderazgo
allocate,
político del sector educativo.
monitor,
Los
and
ministerios de
report
educación
with the
deben
necessary
liderar la conformación de un
disaggregations,
acuerdo nacional
mobilize
amplio que
resources
sitúe a la
across
educación
sectors. The
al
fifth
centro de
one
una
is
estrategia
political
nacional de
leadership in the
desarrollo.
education system.
Muchas
Ministries of
gracias.
education to take the lead in establishing a broad national agreement that takes place. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Mariana. I've listed a few important points in your presentations referring to the importance of political leadership when talking about investing in learning equity, importance of minimum investments per pupil. Again, the issue of transparency and accountability, which I think is really across the four presentations that we have heard, and also the importance of looking at the education sector more globally as part of the social policies in place. So maybe to open a little bit the round table between the five of you, I would come back to the initial introductory words of Martin, who was talking about those two concepts of equity and efficiency, with the idea that quite often they are seen as opposing goals and two opposed concepts. But from your own experience, from your own perspective, from your own research, for some of you, how you see ways to reconcile those two concepts and to present them in a kind of complementary manner. I don't know who wants to react on this. Yes, Tian.
Merci Muriel. Je vais
Thank
répondre.
you. I'm going to actually respond in French.
Oh, il faut que j'enlève la traduction.
I've got to deactivate the translation. Right. Yes. I've got several things on my screen. Well, there could be some kind of contradiction in between equity and equality. And this is actually a false issue. And this is especially true in early childhood. The work done by Ekman, who has won the Nobel Prize in Economics for doing work in early childhood education. When you invest in early childhood, and when it's actually targeted on underprivileged population, you have the highest returns in terms of the education system. And why? In fact, when you give underprivileged children quality educational chances, they actually come to the primary with the necessary tools to have normal schooling without problems. And as Mariana said, there is less dropout, less repetition, and less need for remedial programs, which are extremely costly in African countries, in low-income countries. All these programs of remedial programs are extremely costly and not very efficient. So giving children, underprivileged children, the right chances is a guarantee for success. Now, I'm not going to repeat what Mariana said. Once you're out of school, there's a lot of advantages in terms of society. As Ikman showed, this is the strong investment that could be as high as 6 to 18% investment in early childhood. There are other studies that show that when you do not invest in early childhood, that also will give rise to a cost of inaction, which is loss of potential income and loss, or what we call an opportunity loss. And that could actually cost a colossal sum of the GDP. So we're really talking of extremely important things here for early childhood. Investment in early childhood is actually the two sides of the same coin, equity and efficiency. And equity is actually equal to efficiency. Now, this is a discussion that should not even be held today. Thank you so much, Diane. Are there any other people who would like to react to this equity and efficacy being the same sides of the coin, the two sides of the same coin?
Yes. Let me switch off the English. It's okay. I'm going to mute the original audio. Okay, it's okay. Yes, quería resaltar acá el rol crucial que tienen los ministerios de educación, ¿no? En hacer
Now, education has an important role, an essential role. In order to create this link between equity and efficiency, you really have to invest properly in education. And it's also efficient in terms of development when you invest properly in education. And this is what the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Finance must be promoting. Investment in education should be strategic because we need to ensure inclusive social development. You need to use data, and all this also furthers quality education and helps us in achieving the SDGs. But we really need reliable data that helps us demonstrate this return on investment and the correlation between efficiency and efficacy.
Thank you, Mariana. Albert, you wanted also to complement on this?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not going back to what my predecessor have already alluded to. I was just going to quickly share a strategy that I believe could actually be useful in terms of ways of including cost effectiveness analysis by context. So the same intervention cost differently across the region. For example, teacher retention costs more in remote areas, for example. Therefore, efficiency analysis might be locally specific, not centralized. So that's really one of the examples. Another example will be, for example, in terms of infrastructure, solar power, for example, in rural classroom may be more cost efficient than grid extension. So all to say, there's no single solution that you can apply to all these different contents. There's need to localize, which I think is so important as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Albert. Anna?
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to repeat again what has been said, but I think that there are different strategies to reconcile equity and efficiency in education funding. Some have already been mentioned. And one I think that may be highlighted here is that the use of allocating more to high-cost learners. Albert said something about that, because when we think about rurality, for example, that's something that may cost more for teacher retention or other issues, and something that has been also posted in the past is about the distance. So the use of need-based formula that allocate more to high-cost learners may be useful while maintaining transparency. A second one is, and I think this already been said, is the intervention with high social returns, not just economic returns. Mariana showed different returns, the social returns, for example, of early childhood, school meals, scholarship for disadvantage are very important, and combine universal baselines with top-ups also. The discussion between universal funding and the targeted is very important, I think, because and it's even more important, as we heard about in the current landscape of education funding, and in particular because it calls to the principle of progressive realization that is very important now, where to prioritize and where to invest. The interpretation of education as a cost, as an investment, as a right is really critical here. And then something that is also related to what Albert was saying about the local context is also important to invest in the local capacity. I think local capacity is fundamental, not just because implementation is easier, but also because there is the idea of local ownership that very often is missing when there are external actors coming in. And then also something that is expanding is a little bit about the performance-linked funding that mirror also the idea of conditional cash transfers, so linking the funding to particular issues. So there are different ways to combine and to balance equity and efficiency. I don't want to be exhaustive, but it's very important to talk about these issues in this kind of debate. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Anna. And then following up on this discussion of the importance of targeted funding versus universal approaches, since all of you mentioned the importance of transparency and accountability in this perspective, it would be interesting to have your views on that. I remember years back, we had a study at IP related to this topic, trying to see whether at the end of the day, sometimes you are more or less equitable through targeted funding when you don't have the capacity to really monitor the funds and make sure that the funds really end up where they are supposed to end. While sometimes universal measures are known by everybody, the schools know what they are supposed to get, the family knows what they are supposed to receive, and then it's easier for them to make education authorities down to account. So how do you see this balance between the targeted versus universal approaches, but particularly from this transparency and accountability angle? Who wants to contribute on this one? Yuki, maybe?
Sure, I can actually start. So the universality versus targeted financing. Both are important as a financing tool. Only thing is that we need to be mindful that the per student cost is not always equal. It's because of different factors that are related to student. It could be remoteness of a school or the poverty level or disability that would actually make different needs for different students. And also the level of education is requires different costs per student at the same time. What universality means is that everyone is equally educated or have access to education with some good quality materials. What it means is that
we do need universality to some extent, but with adjustment for some to be able to take in care of some the additional cost for the people who do need more. And it doesn't mean that's actually that's unsustainable. It is actually more sustainable because we are making sure that the money is being used for the better use and for the more equitable use. But in order to achieve that, I think we're going to the data issues, but at the same time, this requires some more understanding of the data availability in terms of where the money is being lacking, what are the local government, what's the local government capacity in terms of financing in case of the decentralization, in case of the centralized countries, then what will be the need in terms of the distance, what will be the needs of the schools. So unfortunately, universality is not sufficient, obviously, because of those factors. But at the same time, the sustainability is also linked to the efficient use of money for the students in need. I think that's where it starts, and then we can talk a little more about the data and how we should be able to actually formulate such differences.
Good. Thank you, Yuki. We're going to come to the issue of data, but before that, maybe staying on this topic of especially transparency and accountability when looking at those two different funding approaches, Anna?
Yeah, adding on what Yuki was saying, I think it's very important to highlight the issue of local capacity again, because targeting mechanism require very strong data and very strong capacity, and their costs may be large. But the issue of equity, because we are discussing equity, is different in terms of universal approaches and targeted approaches. And what we see, for example, for the early childhood literature, but for many any kind literature, is that the effects of universal programs often tend to fade over time. While, for example, if we think about the huge literature on early childhood in the United States, we see that targeted programs still deliver very, very important results. So I think there is not a single answer that fits all, because in low capacity context, maybe universal plus some kind of simple targeting works better than complex targeting. However, as Yuki was saying, I think that it's important to have at least a universal minimum packages, for example, based on some kind of other programs. We'll talk about integration, but school meals, basic capitation, for instance, that matters in terms of universal coverage. And then also in terms of capacity and accountabilities, build registries. I mean, in many countries, in many low resource contexts, we don't have trace of, we have many children, many families that live at the margin of society, and they are invisible, they are out of the system. So it's very difficult to talk about targeting in this context. And another issue is that there is a huge amount of literature that suggests that when universal programs are in place, because of the better information people of the most affluent segment of society or income or education, they are those that benefit most. So I think that we need to think about all these issues when we talk about universal program and targeted programs.
Thank you, Anna. So on this idea of universal minimum plus simple targeting, maybe Mariana, you wanted to react also? We lost Mariana, no? Where is she? Well, Diane, maybe meanwhile, while Mariana is reconnecting.
Oui, je voulais juste rebondir à ce qu'ont dit Anna et Yuki.
I just wanted to react to what Anna and Yuki said.
Pardon, excusez-moi, je vais éteindre.
sorry.
J'abonde totalement dans leur sens et
I
je
fully
suis
agree
tout
with
à fait
them,
d'accord qu'un mix est
and I
nécessaire
fully agree that a mix is
un certain
between
niveau
both is
d'universalisation
necessary
et
between a
aussi
certain level of
ciblage
universalization
de
and a
certains
certain level
types de
of
groupes.
targeting
Il est vrai
for certain
que
groups.
peut-être c'est lié à ça que
It is true, and it might be
l'universalisation
related
peut
to this
aussi
point.
avoir des effets pervers.
Universalization
Bon,
may
on
also
sait
have
qu'on
negative
demande des
effects.
financements
Not only
conséquents,
does it require
mais
a
il peut
large
aussi
amount of
conduire
financing,
à
but it
une
also
sorte d'éviction,
may also lead
une
to
sorte
some sort of eviction,
comment dire,
or I don't know how to put it,
d'un effet où les familles qui
may
pourraient
have
payer
an impact
en
such
fait
that
vont
the
pouvoir
families
bénéficier d'un
that can
système, mais
pay
quelque
will be
part,
able to
cet
benefit from the
argent-là,
system,
au final, ne bénéficie pas à des plus
and this
pauvres qui,
money
du
will
fait
not
même s'il y a
benefit to the
gratuité,
poorest,
l'école reste pour elles de toute manière
and therefore
inaccessible.
school
Donc je
remains
pense que
something
ça peut aussi
not accessible
précédemment
for them.
les frais
And
de
as
scolarité,
this was said earlier
souvent,
on,
sont une part
the
minime
school
des
fees
frais encourus par les
are
familles.
a minimum share of
On
a
voit aussi
part
dans
or
beaucoup
percentage of the
de
costs
pays
for
au
the
niveau
families
scolaire, par
in
exemple,
the
les uniformes
in many
obligatoires.
countries. You have to pay for
Il y a aussi les
uniforms,
coûts
school
de la
uniforms
cantine
that are
scolaire,
compulsory. You also have the
pas
cost
toujours
of
gratuit. Il y a aussi les frais de
food
transport.
in
Donc,
schools,
effectivement,
which
il y
is not
aurait
always
besoin
free. You have the
pour pouvoir
transportation costs.
assurer
So
que
there is a
même si cette
need
universalisation
to
reste
make
équitable,
sure that
de donner plus à ceux
universalization
qui ont
remains
plus parce que
equitable
c'est pas
and to give
suffisant.
more to those who need more,
Donc,
because this is not
voilà ce que
sufficient.
je voulais rajouter par rapport à ce
And
qui vient
that's what
d'être
I
dit.
wanted to
Merci.
add in relation to what was said
Mariana, you
earlier on.
wanted
Thank
to
you.
react also on this one?
Yes, just very briefly. Quería destacar la perspectiva que tiene la CEPAL
I would like
respecto
to
en este
highlight
punto.
what ECLAC
La CEPAL habla de
has
un
to say
universalismo
about
sensible a
this.
las
We talk
diferencias,
about
¿no?
Je voulais
universalism
dire que
that
la CEPA parle
is
d'universalisme. Non
oriented
seulement
towards
c'est
differences as
l'universalisme,
well.
je pense
We
qu'il faut
talk about
également
both
tomando en cuenta las
universal
capacidades de
investment
los
versus
estados.
targeted
Ahora bien,
investment. We
estas
take
capacidades de
into
los estados no
account
son
what the
estructuralmente
state can supply.
inamovibles, sino que también
Sometimes we
abogamos
can
por,
see
como ya decía,
that the
un
state
fortalecimiento
cannot
del
allocate
sistema
funding
de
that
orden
is
educativa,
easily, and we
reforzar el
also need
sistema
to
educativa
focus
y en este
on
contexto la
educational management.
digitalización y la interoperabilidad de las
Also, in
distintas
this
fuentes de información puede ser
context, digitalization
bien
and access to information
una oportunidad
can
para
be an
fortalecer la
important
focalización en
opportunity to
contextos donde hay
strengthen
débiles capacidades
to
institucionales.
help areas that need to strengthen
Thanks a lot,
their capacities.
Mariana. And another topic that several of you have mentioned already in your intervention is the issue of data, and that there are maybe some critical data that are still missing from this debate related to equitable financing. And so it would be maybe interesting to our audience to hear from you what additional data you think could be considered to support more consistent dialogue in this domain. I don't know, Albert, as part of your ongoing discussion on reducing learning poverty, are there things related to very specific data that should be highlighted much more in future?
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think data on model that work in the African context. I think, for example, for example, we need a kind of data that enable the scaling of successful interventions. I think what we have seen. And the question is, how do you scale whatever success you see? And this is really about getting the right data to. So within countries for issue of inequality, Grano, can you hear me?
You're a bit in and out, but we can catch it.
Yeah. So within country inequality, granular data, for example, rural, urban, region, ethnicity, disability, and so on. Those are really important data that really are difficult to give to facilitate targeted interventions, especially to those that need it the most. And beyond the budget allocation, I think we need data on actual fund flows to school, for example, tracking from ministries to classroom, so that we can better understand the uptake, the implementation barriers, which in many cases really actually prevent effective use. So in general, I see data as a so important tool that facilitates decision making, and this is something that we have been really advocating for. Creating a culture of data-driven decision-making remains a serious issue in many of the contexts. And more importantly, as we look into moving from project to system, data provided flow to strengthen systems in different ways. So I believe this is so critical. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Albert. Our colleague from the GEM, I don't know if there are some specific data that you would like to highlight. Yes, Yuki?
Um, Maybe before going to specific data or some importance of more qualitative data, perhaps, I just wanted to mention that, you can actually classify countries into so many different types of groups in terms of the reallocation of the funding from, let's say, the central government level to subnationals or to schools. And it all comes down to whether the countries use this data. And what it means is that the easiest they can actually rely on is the population data or the enrollment data. And that's already actually above and beyond a sophisticated way the countries actually use to reallocate the resources into different school levels or to subnational governments. Many countries still rely on historical data without or with the information on the number of students enrolled, without counting the number of the students or the population that are outside of the school, for example. So as you see more and more advanced level, you start to see the countries starting to adopt more information in the way that they actually formulate this essential budget, which is basically, we call it a universal budget. So instead of just a per student cost, we do also see some of those revenue capacity by each regions or each provinces, meaning that they may try to balance out the lack of funding by regions. And the second, another one is to be able to see whether these actually there are some students with disability or hardship that we need to address. And then sometimes the index actually increases by introducing remoteness or rurality in the disadvantage formula. So as countries more and more introduces the data system or the mechanism in place, and the more that the system is centralized and more the centrally government actually helps the subnational the governments as well as the schools, we see more integrated approach. We see a lot more sustainable approach to face with the data collection. So I'm just going to use some examples. So like I have examples from South Africa. So they have national norms and standards for school funding. They use quintile ranking based on the socioeconomic data by school. And they also actually try to spend more towards the non-personnel spending to lower income schools. Uganda also has the simple formula with the per school allocation, but with a with a base of enrollment base plus more variable factors in it. Funding from Brazil is very well known, and it also has the per student formula, but redistributed across the states and municipalities with so many different the factors involved, and to make sure that that there's a minimum spending on teachers as well as learners. And Ethiopia, for example, in Africa, they also have this general education improvement program, school grants, and they also combine not just the enrollment data, but fixed amount per school. So which means the country does have a capacity to actually measure the school needs, which really goes into the collaboration between the central government, but at the same time with the strong involvement of the regions as well as the schools. So I think, like we can talk about like what's missing, but I think we also have a very essential data that we want to make sure that we want to incorporate in those school funding mechanism, if it is the formula or not. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Yuki. So more comprehensive approach to data, maybe just very two short points to end up on this one, and then we'll move to the questions from the audience. Maybe Diane and Anna.
Je voulais faire un point sur
I
les
just
données.
wanted to make a point on data
dans la petite enfance et peut-être
on
rebondir sur ce que vient de dire
early
Adrien.
childhood.
Alors d'abord, dans la petite enfance, on fait face
Now,
à
in
des
early
besoins criants, mais
childhood,
dans
there
plein
is
de domaines.
really
Pour
a
commencer par les
crying
informations
need,
sur les
starting
scolarisations.
off from
Beaucoup de systèmes d'information n'ont
enrollment.
pas
There are many information systems
de données sur
do not have
les
data
élèves scolarisés
on
dans les
the
établissements
children
éducatifs.
who are schooled,
Donc, les enfants qui sont
especially
dans
in
les
non-state
établissements
schools.
communautaires,
So
privés,
community schools,
confessionnels,
private
et
schools,
aussi dans les
faith
programmes
schools,
qu'on vit
and
en fait
even
à la maison, sont
in
complètement biaisés. Donc, ça ne permet pas d'avoir une
homeschooling, this
unité
data is
pour prédire
absent in MS.
combien d'enfants sont
So
scolarisés
we
dans
do
la
not
petite
know
enfance.
how many children
On n'a pas
in
non
early
plus,
childhood are
ça permet pas
schooled.
non plus de comprendre qu'est-ce qui tire la croissance des effectifs quand celle-ci augmente. Est-ce que c'est le privé? Est-ce que
Now,
c'est le public? Donc ça quand même, en termes
we do not
d'équité,
know
ça a
if
des
it's
enjeux importants.
private or public, and this
Un autre
really
aspect
gives rise to
qu'Albert a
certain
évoqué, c'est un
stakes.
manque de données
Another
désagrégées par différents
thing
types
Albert
d'équité.
spoke about
En
is
général, on a pour la petite
absence of
enfance des
disaggregated
informations sur les
data.
garçons filles, mais il
For
s'avère que
we
ces
have
dimensions
information
n'ont
on
pas de
boys and
corrélation.
girls
En général, il y a
for
parité à ce niveau-là, mais par contre,
early
avec
childhood.
ça,
There is
il y a un
parity,
gros
there's no problem, but
gap
there
c'est
are
au niveau
serious
des richesses de l'image,
discrepancies in
avoir un
terms
handicap,
of
et aussi
disability
milieu
and
rural. Et tout ça n'est pas
other
toujours bien
areas, the
intégré. Il
urban-rural
faudrait
divide.
déjà
And
se faire une idée de
so there
où
is
sont
a
ces enfants qui n'ont
major
sont pas
idea,
scolarisés.
there's a major
Et
problem
est-ce que les
in
politiques et les
understanding where
financements
are
finalement
children who are not
ciblent
in the
ces
system.
enfants-là? Un deuxième donnée manquante, et là
And
aussi je vais rebondir avec ce
another
que a dit Albert,
thing
concerne la qualité.
is
On ne
quality.
connaît pas la
We
qualité
do
des
not
programmes
know the
d'éducation préscolaire.
quality of
Donc, on va mettre à
preschool
l'échelle quoi?
programs.
Il y a le
So
risque de mettre
what
à
are we
l'échelle
going
finalement des
to
programmes qui ne produisent
upscale? There's a risk
qui
of
permettent pas aux enfants
upscaling
d'arriver au
programs
téléphone. Donc
that
ça a un
really
problème.
do
Donc, plus
not serve the
d'informations sur
purpose.
les
So we
indicateurs de
need more
qualité, c'est
information on
de base,
quality
par exemple,
indicators.
c'est le
So
ratio élève-type, c'est
the
aussi
student-teacher ratio,
la pédagogie utilisée en classe, très importante, la
the
pédagogie
the
en
the
préscolaire.
teaching
Donc, on n'a pas du tout
used in class,
d'informations, et
it's
on n'a pas
extremely
non plus
important. So we
d'informations
don't
sur
have
les aptitudes des
information,
élèves
and we
en
do
fin de
not have
préscolaire. Donc, des outils existent,
information
mais
on
peu de pays
what the
encore les
children
utilisent
have
et
learned
les utilisent et
at the end of the year.
intègrent
So
dans leur système de suivi
all this has
et
to be
de gestion
integrated in
de
the
programme.
follow-up
Et un
system.
troisième point, c'est les financements.
The
C'est
third
juste
point is funding.
catastrophique.
It's
L'UNESCO, dans leur
absolutely
dernier,
abysmal. UNESCO,
on a
in
ici
its
posté dans leur revue de
latest
l'évaluation du financement de la petite
review
enfance,
of
on a essayé de collecter des informations
funding
et sur
preschool,
la moitié des
tried
pays, la
to
moitié des pays en
con
fait rapporter des
tried
informations
to
budgétaires. La moitié.
actually
Donc pour la moitié des pays, on pouvait savoir
have a
quelle était
survey.
l'équipe
So
de financement
for
qui allait à
more
l'éducation
than
vis-à-vis
half
du PIB ou vis-à-vis des
school
budgets
for
d'université.
countries, we knew
Et ce
what
qu'on
was
voit,
being
nous, dans nos
given
travaux, c'est
to
que la petite
the
enfance, souvent, est
preschools, but
fusionnée avec le
uh,
primaire dans les budgets.
early
Donc ici,
childhood
on est
is
aussi complètement
often
invisible. Et donc,
coupled with
c'est très
primary. So
compliqué
it's
pour
really
nous de savoir
impossible to
elle
know
n'apparaît aucune
how
œuvre
much
qui va à
funding is
l'éducation. Elle
given
n'a aucune
to
information
early
aussi en termes de
childhood
salaire,
because the
d'entretien, à
whole
part
thing is
aussi
actually
des questions
clubbed as
salariales et notamment
primary.
celles
So we don't know the
qui a trait à la
split.
qualité. Et un dernier point qui manque,
And the
c'est le
last
coût.
point
Et
is the
Yuki en a
cost
parlé,
of
donc le coût des
education,
programmes.
the cost of programs,
Notamment donc, des coûts des programmes
especially
non
the
publics.
cost of programs in
Et aussi des coûts unitaires. Quand
non-public
on va
schools
mettre à
and the
l'échelle, il faut
unit
savoir
cost.
aussi quel est le coût par
So
élève
we
pour pouvoir
really have
mettre à
to
l'échelle.
know
Et
what
effectivement,
is
comme l'a
the
souligné
cost
Yuki, les
per
coûts varient
student.
selon
As
qu'on est en
Yuki
milieu
said,
urbain ou
the
rural et selon
cost
effectivement
is different
les
whether
besoins
you're in an urban or
redresser
a rural setup. And if you really need to
Donc,
bolster
ce qu'on
certain
utilise
expenses
dans le cadre de la petite
for
enfance,
equity.
et donc
So
tous les
again,
domaines
the
que j'avais
situation
évoqués
is rather
sont très
grim
importants à
for
pouvoir
early
renforcer
childhood, and all these
pour pouvoir
areas I talked about is extremely
justement
important.
avoir un dialogue
And we
plus
really
efficace
need to
qui
have
permet
an
aussi
efficient
d'aider
dialogue,
pour
and we
des
really need
financements
to
accrus et plus efficaces
actually
sur la petite enfance.
make a case
Merci.
for
Anna,
increased
tu voulais
funding.
compléter
Thank
là-dessus?
you. Anna,
Oui,
would
en
you want
fait,
to
je
say
voulais dire
something? We
les mêmes choses que Diane, mais élargies. Donc, la seule chose que je voudrais vraiment, I would like to throw in one question. Why we're discussing data here? It's not because we like necessarily data. It's because we increasingly, there is a discussion about evidence-based policy making. We need data to do right evaluation. We need to evaluate the programs and know where to put the money. And the fact is that I should say that doing this huge exercise we are doing to create the profiles for the next report, what we realize is that there is a huge amount of data, but these are not published, or they are put in a very non-friendly way. So it's very difficult to collect this data. So really, this is a call also for more transparency where this data exists so that researchers can do their job. And I think that is really something very important. As Yuki say, many of these data exist. It's not just that they are missing, is that they are there, but we should be able to use them. It's very important to know where to put the money, also where is the priorities should go. And that's the point.
Thanks, Anna. So now we are going to pick up a few questions from the audience. And the first one from someone that we know well at the Institute, and you all know well also Sylvia Schmelkes, mentioning that decisions in education are very sensitive to political pressure that comes mainly from more privileged areas and groups. Any ideas on how to manage this? Maybe Albert, I don't know, since your call to action is also for governments first, I assume. So how would you react to that on how to mobilize?
Sorry, Muriel, I may have missed the question.
The question is the question, in fact, from Sylvia, mentioning that decisions in education are very sensitive to political pressure that comes mainly from more privileged areas and groups. Any ideas on how to manage this when we are talking about reducing inequalities in the education sector through funding?
Yeah, I think based on the discussion we are following here, there are a number of tools that have been really discussed. So the issue, for example, of using evidence to me remains so important. Any change from a policy to classroom need to be evidenced. So a decision should definitely come with what works, for example. To me, that's the real starting point. Secondly, I think we need to make education very participative. I think we are also missing here an opportunity. I have seen, even in some countries where they have really strengthened teacher parents associations, where parents are playing a critical role in the management of the school, for example. And this is really about strengthening the leadership, the school leadership in some of these countries, so that parents, they can feel part of the decision as well. So the participation to me is so important, so that education is becoming public goods, for everyone to understand the importance of investing, not just looking at the costing element. So those are really some of the measures that we need to bring. How do we bring education issues on top of the priorities of the country and the high-level discussion taking place at the country, so that everyone feel the urgency of investing in this important for the future of the country? Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Albert.
That's so important.
There is also one question, I think, to our colleague from the GEM team, Kaiser, mentioning why GDP is the only yardstick to measure public financing when there are more holistic means available in terms of, for instance, percentage of budget allocations to different parts of the education sector or other things. I don't know, GEM colleagues, do you want to react to this question?
Sure. We can always use as a share of government and spending as a different measures. I think it's more to do with a cross-country analysis. When it comes to, so let's say the education spending as a share of GDP versus education spending as a share of governance of government, we actually see different sort of tendencies. Spending as a share of GDP, we often see lower spending in low and middle income countries. And it's related to the fact that the tax revenue is not as high as the other countries in the world. So you see some OECD countries or mainly high income countries, education spending is actually high as a share of GDP for those countries. And that's vice versa for the education spending as a share of government in low-income countries versus high-income countries. And it just like gives you different ways to look at the data and then the country situations. So I totally agree with with him in terms of like why we're not using it. I think it's important that we should use it, different indicators. For example, budget. If we have information across countries about the budget, yes, we should use it because it actually gives a different perspective than the expenditure data, because that's how much the government has committed versus how much actually has spent. So unfortunately, budget is least available across countries. And then often the actual spending pattern differs quite a lot in reality. But at the same time, for the peer review, we have used a lot of budget data because that's the most available data. So all of them are quite important and give very different pictures. And then we should actually emphasize the need to use more.
Thanks a lot, Yuki. There is another question that is directly addressed to Mariana on the context of Latin America by Yvette Romero, mentioning how can equitable investment be implemented in Latin America countries at a time when there is such a huge diaspora? How the students from the diaspora can be supported when keeping this learning equity in mind?
Gracias por la pregunta. Efectivamente, hay una gran
Thank you
diáspora y
so
una
much
gran
for this
migración interna
question.
también, la migración
Indeed,
interna
there is
al norte de
a
la región
huge
ha
internal
aumentado
immigration in Latin America.
el goce
It's
de la migración total.
regional
Y
immigration.
acá es importante el tema de las regulaciones, ¿no? De asegurar el derecho a la educación a todos los niños y niñas
You
independientes de dónde
really need to
provienen. Y aquí vuelve el
guarantee
tema de los
the
datos,
right of
a la
education
importancia
to all children, irrespective of
de
their
contar con
origin.
la
And this is why
desagregación
data
de
becomes
los
even
datos
more
de
important.
inversión educativa
We
para saber cómo
need
se están distribuyendo en los
disaggregated data
estudiantes
in
a los
education
cuales queremos
investment
implementar
to
acciones
know
afirmativas y
how
acciones
to
especiales. En
invest
este
in
caso,
students.
cuánto estamos invirtiendo en
We
cada país en estudiantes
want to
migrantes, por ejemplo.
adopt
Esto es
targeted
muy importante y es muy
measures
importante
we
vincularlo, y
to
volviendo también a
see
la pregunta anterior,
how to
cuánto
invest
estamos
in
gastando
migrant
efectivamente
students.
en el presupuesto
Now, I'm
público
going to
por
come
cada
back to the
grupo diferente de
previous
estudiantes,
question.
pero
How
además
much are
cuánto
we
cuesta
spending
invertir para asegurar una
and
inversión de calidad en estos
how
estudiantes.
much does it cost to
Sí,
ensure
estamos
quality
pasando por un
investment
periodo de mucha
and
también
proper
volatilidad
returns?
política en la región.
The
Y es
political
importante que
situation is
todos
extremely
entendamos que invertir en
volatile
educación
in
es
Latin
una
America.
inversión que
An
nos beneficia a
investment
todos, ¿no?
in
Es una inversión
education
estratégica
is an
y por
investment
eso mismo
which
es
is
importante no dejar a
beneficial to
nadie
one
atrás,
and
en
all. It is
particular a los
strategic
estudiantes
investment. That is
migrantes.
why no one
Thanks a
should
lot,
be
Mariana.
left on
So
the
we were going to
sideline,
end up
and that
here with
includes
the question of the
immigrant
audience, and
children.
maybe we
Thank
can
you so
conclude
much.
if each one of you maybe can say just
Good.
one sentence to conclude. If there is some things you would like our audience to take away on this topic of planning funding approaches to address learning inequalities in a time of change, one basic ideas that you would like people to bring back with them after this session. I don't know, Albert. One key point.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? Can you hear me?
Just one key point for our audience that you would like our audience to bring back after the end of this session on this topic.
One, maybe two or three important issues that I'm seeing here. I think the point that is coming, we have a number of tools that are available, that could actually help to strengthen education financing, as per the discussion here. The question is, how do we make sure that we put a good use by countries? I see a great potential, the opportunity here. How do we make sure that countries have access to this tool and can use them appropriately? Secondly, is around the issue we discussed about anything to do with accountability and transparency in the use of available resources. To me, that's so important, and that will definitely support strengthening system. Last but not least, of course, coordination of efforts. Coordination has never been so critical, yes, to facilitate reaching out to those marginalized communities. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Albert. Our colleague from the GEM, either Yuki or Anna or both.
I will start, and I think Yuki can also say things, but the last point of Albert for me is the most important, maybe the issue of coordination. We didn't talk much about it, but I think the idea of integrated services is really, or cross-sectoral approaches for promoting equitable funding is really critical. And these include talking about integrated service delivery, innovative financing mechanism, and policy coordination. Policy coordination across different government sectors, different partners. It is not just horizontal coordination, but also vertical coordination. These go back to what Albert was also saying about leadership. And the leadership means getting all together. And really, we talk about different actors there, families, parents, communities, students, the school management, the political leadership. This is really, there should be much more coordination to really advance on equitable education financing. Yuki.
Thank you, Anna. Yuki?
Yes, just very quickly. Like you were saying, accountability and transparency for equity, it all comes from making data, information, policies available. And this also actually makes the involvement of every stakeholder an important factor to making sure that the accountability is well monitored and practiced, not just from, let's say, local level, teachers, parents, schools, but at the same time with the local government, and then this leadership that Albert and Anna have been talking about, that we do need a leadership from the minister and Minister of Education, and making sure they are the one leading for the discussions with the Minister of Finance, because in the end of the day, the money actually comes from Minister of Finance, and we need them to be able to talk the importance of this universality as well as the targeted financing mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you. Mariana, you want to add something?
Sí, sí, Yuki me quitó la palabra porque yo quería
Yes, Yuki
destacar el tema del
took the
liderazgo,
words
¿no?
out
Y
of
creo que
my
lo más
mouth because I
relevante en
wanted to
eso
focus on
es
leadership.
asegurar
Leadership
que
from the
la
Ministry of
educación sea
Education
puesta al
to
centro de
ensure
nuestra
that
estrategia de
education
desarrollo, que
is
entendamos que
at the
de invertir
center
con equidad es
of education
invertir con
development. We need to
eficiencia
invest with equity. This means that we are investing efficiently.
y que en este liderazgo, en el fondo, asumamos la
Also,
responsabilidad
when we
de
think
conversar con los
about
ministerios
leadership,
de
we need
finanzas
to
y de
hold
Hacienda
ourselves
en su idioma.
accountable, and we need to
Eh,
talk to
La
different
educación es un
ministers
derecho,
and
por
talk
supuesto que
their
lo es,
language.
pero también es una inversión
Education is a
estratégica
right,
para
but
que
it
avancemos
also
todos juntos
means,
hacia adelante.
or it also is a
Thank
strategic
you, Mariana. Last word,
intervention, or
Yann.
investment.
Tu veux ajouter quelque chose, Yann?
Anything you want to add, Anne?
Oui, un petit mot peut-être pour finir sur... on est à
Yann?
5 ans de 2030.
Yes, just one
Faisons en
word.
sorte que la
We are
petite
5
enfance
years before
devienne
to
centrale
2030. Let's
dans les
make sure
politiques
that
de
the early
financement de
childhoods become
l'éducation.
central
C'est
in the
quelque chose pas
education
pour
financing
vraiment
policies, because this
que
is not
dès
the
le
case
qu'on
yet.
donne aux
So as
enfants
to
les
make
fondamentaux
sure
et
we
que
give
ça
the
puisse avoir des
children the
répercussions aussi dans le
fundamentals they
système
need, and
éducatif.
this may have an impact on the whole education
So
system.
thanks a lot
Thank you.
to all our panelists. I think there was a great convergence, in fact, in your presentations, conclusions, and key messages, especially around, well, first, transparency and accountability. Clearly, that came out very high in all of your presentations in connections with data. Second one, on the importance of coordinated efforts at all levels, from the school levels up to the whole sector levels, and the sector with other sectors, including the private sector. And the third one, clearly related to political leadership, again, at different levels, but especially at ministry level, and including in the dialogue and discussions with Ministry of Finance. So I think this was very clear lessons and takeaways from this session today. So thanks a lot for to all of our panelists. As you've understood, there is a lot of information, documents, call for actions, paper brief, and other things behind those presentations. And so we've shared some of the links within the chat with you. Maybe Martin, you want to say a last word before we close? No? And just to tell you that this was our last strategic debate for 2025, but that we are going to reorganize a new series of strategic debates in 2026. And so we very much hope that you will be again connected and following us. So thanks a lot, and please be kept posted on IP's work and news. Thank you, and thanks to all of our speakers.
Yeah, thank you, Marielle. Thank you, colleagues. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Organizing. Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye-bye.